Bold and raw perspectives of local politics. Important information which impacts our community, nation, and world. Exposing truth, transparency, and getting to the heart of relevant issues that you just won't see in the clickbait media. And always keeping it real. It's the Michelle Tanner Podcast.
But I won't back down.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Michelle Tanner Podcast. We've had lots of exciting things happen these last few days, but before we get into that and before we introduce you to today's awesome guest, let me first give a shout out to the St. George Sunrise Market. Make sure that you are checking them out every Saturday from 10 to 2 over at Segmiller Park. It's an awesome atmosphere, and just support local business. There's so many, I was actually just talking to a friend a couple days ago, and she said, oh yeah, I go there every Saturday. I get my eggs, I get homemade bread, I get my produce, and lots of just homemade arts, crafts, jewelry. So great atmosphere, St. George Sunrise Market. Also, Bella 2 Medical, BELLA2 Medical, which is here local in St. George, but also telemedicine visits in 38 states. So been doing actually a lot lately of getting people emergency medications to keep on hand. Also things like ivermectin, and then here in office, all things medical, aesthetics, IV infusions. So definitely check us out at bella2medical.com. All right, on to the exciting episode today. So I have with me here, he's been on before actually, so y'all probably know Tim Anderson. Welcome to the Michelle Tanner Podcast.
Well, thank you. This is a fun place to be.
It is, and I always love having super smart, educated attorneys like you here, and authors, by the way, which I am excited to get through this whole book. I got it for Christmas, which I'm really excited about, and I've started reading it already. It's called Blue, Red, and Dead: When It's Too Close to Call But Not Too Close to Kill by Timothy Burton Anderson. Should we play a quick clip of this before we get into this?
That would be fun.
Blue, Red, and Dead takes us deep into the heart of a contentious American election, a dark world of power, betrayal, and revenge. As the tension builds, you'll feel yourself getting drawn into the world of political gamesmanship, corruption, and mystery. Anderson's writing pulls you deeper into a narrative where nothing is as it seems, and every character has a hidden agenda. The stakes keep climbing, and you'll find yourself eagerly turning pages, trying to figure out what happens next.
There it is.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit more about this book. I mean, you've written books before, so this is not necessarily new for you.
No,
but
the Reign of the Stavka, a few years in the really late 90s, and then my whole experience with Rocky IV. We won't talk about that today, but the expanded screenplay treatment. But then going forward on this one, this really is a remake of a book I wrote actually in 2006, but I updated it, and it was based upon a too close to call presidential election. And when we saw this election coming, and maybe that's, the book's doing okay, but it might do better except for what really is going on, because I expected and anticipated a very contentious election. Figured everyone would be suing everybody, and we'd be in a real rip-roaring battle over the White House about now.
Right.
And guess what? We're not.
Wasn't that just amazing, though, the mandate that we witnessed? Because I know for me, going back to what we witnessed in 2020, and that was certainly a contentious election.
Oh, yeah.
And we can get into some of that in January 6th, since there was some pardons that occurred recently. But then flashing forward to 2024, like you, I thought this is going to be a battle and contentious, and to see the clean sweep of Donald Trump and the red wave of winning every single swing state, winning the popular vote, the House, the Senate. I mean, amazing.
And due to what I agree, maybe not to the extent that some do, but I believe there was manipulation in the last election, and that he had to win it big to win it, which he did. And this story that I've written is about a total standoff Like the Electoral College can't even come to a conclusion. And so we've got the situation where we have two perfect candidates, two people that they don't need the job at all because one is married to the richest man in the world, a guy in the state of Washington whose first name is Bill. And the other is a Heisman Trophy winner, a quarterback, head of a large oil company, former governor of Oklahoma, who is on the Republican side. And he's one that actually shunned the NFL in order to go to Oxford.
Wow.
And so we got these two super candidates, the perfect candidates, but they may not need it, but both of them want it so badly that they will do anything to win.
Not that we ever see that in politics.
No, not at all. Not at all. No. And this story is, there's a lot of symbolism in this story, but it centers around a character named Robert Cannon. And he's an over-the-hill CIA operative who just, his nickname is The Lever. And he is the most prolific assassin in the CIA. And he happens to be working as his regular job is as a clerk or an investigator for a small boutique Georgetown law firm. And he gets a request, and they come about in some fairly interesting ways, but he gets a request from the CIA on one day to take out a 100-year-old congressman from Mississippi. And the very next day, through another set of circumstances, he's contacted by agents of the Department of Defense who want him to take out an aging woman justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, of course, all this is happening at the time that the Electoral College is deadlocked. The courts are in action. Congress is in action. And so the story goes through the whole legal process as well as what you do with the presidency when it's totally in chaos. And that's how this story unfolds. And so I won't tell you how it goes because you got to buy it and read it, but it's a fun story. It's a wild story, and you will not guess the ending.
I can tell you, even just from the short amount that I've been able to read so far, I didn't want to put the book down. I mean, just from the very first paragraph, it's like, wait, what? So I can tell it's brilliantly written.
It has a pretty good love story in it, too.
Awesome.
But when you see how they think or strategize to decide the election, at first you'll say, this is crazy, and you'll think, yeah, this may not be as crazy as you think when you have these, but it's really the principle, the symbolism behind it that becomes significant, and that is that the drive to maintain and retain power is so extreme in our system. And I picked the presidency because that's what everybody wants to talk about.
Right.
But this story applies to your state level, your city council, city level, and county, and just governmental entities at all. Because a lot of times what we find ourselves doing is we sort of, especially in Utah, we sort of run like, Reagan Republicans, but we end up governing like FDR Democrats or bring it forward, Obama Democrats.
Right.
I don't know what you call Biden because I never figured that one out. And so the story really turns on lots of those things, but it has lots of turns and twists that, it's like the promotion said, it just carries people's imagination in different directions. And just as it seems somewhat improbable, it seems very, very possible once you look into it the way it is. Because we live in a world of deception.
Right.
And from the political side in particular, that's the case. Hopefully it's not going to be as difficult with the new president in place.
Right.
But we'll see.
Well, and well said with, what really motivates a lot of politicians and people in general. You've got power, which is the big one, money, and sex. Like those three things you can usually look at of what is motivating someone. And that's why it's so vital that in political positions, especially, that we are getting representatives in there who stick to principles, because there's always going to be things that come up. And like you mentioned about Utah, where it's like they run as conservatives and then they govern like Democrats. It's because of this system that people get so easily sucked into of just following along what a lot of times the unelected bureaucrats are telling them to do, because, everyone wants to be part of the cool kids club and even this elitist type culture, that it's really easy for people to bend on those principles that they ran on if it's somehow benefiting them either on a personal level or in those three categories, and power being one of them, of wanting to stay in those positions.
Yeah, it becomes a game of, and sadly, sort of a game of political elites. People want to retain if they're in a position of adulation and they're getting attention, and we all do it, by the way. We all are not just, we all are suspects in this process.
Right.
And that is that we like to keep things the way they are. But by the nature of our constitutional democracy, things are not always the way they are. It's a progressive process. And the greater the participation, the better it is. But a lot of times we try to reduce the participation. In today's digital world, this is not the Industrial Revolution anymore, where you got a bunch of voters that are the producers. Now you have a few people that control the bytes, and they can, in some degree, control the decisions.
Right.
And so, it's going to be interesting going forward into the future to see how well the democracy is preserved in a world where all the voters may not be as needed as they've been in the past. And that's kind of scary in a way, but that's where we're headed. When I see what was, announced today, the Stargate project, that'll be interesting to see where that rolls. And really all that is that's the process of solving problems much faster than we ever have before. So it may take 10 years to cure prostate cancer, but with Stargate, maybe it'll be done in 3.
Yeah.
It'll eventually be done, but that's that's the idea behind it. Whether it really goes that way, I don't know. They're selling it sort of based on the medical thing, but we'll see.
Right. Well, anything that involves too much government intervention, regardless of how great the idea is or promise of safety, security. I just was listening to a thing on the way over here about, this heightened AI that's going to potentially essentially be able to stop crimes before they happen, and the surveillance and this road potentially that we could go down. To me, it's just terrifying. I would so much rather value the privacy and those rights than those guise of, but it's for your safety. It's going to cure cancer. Well, okay, that's great. I'm all about innovation and development, as long as it's not being forced on me.
Well, they're going to hate us lawyers that get in the way. So that's kind of the way it works. But in my story, that is the kind of the focus, is that there is such a level of control. But in a way, each situation, it's an individual situation, because we make our choices on whether we will consent to be controlled or not. And I think that right now we look at the battle over TikTok. A lot of choices have been made there,
right,
to perhaps submit us to the intelligent operation of a foreign power. And but people are okay with that because they get an immediate result and don't think of the long-term implications. But that's the way stuff is sold to us.
Well, and my concern, with the whole TikTok thing is I'm every bit as worried about Zuckerberg over at Facebook and even Elon. I like Elon. I like what he's doing. He's saved free speech essentially with taking over Twitter. So I appreciate that. But I'm also don't buy this notion of, but evil TikTok because they're Chinese owned. And I am concerned, and I will say, I support Donald Trump. I was out there for the inauguration, although they did have some last-minute changes to the venue, which was really disappointing. Most of us who had tickets could no longer be there in person, where they moved it indoors. But nonetheless, being out there in Washington, D.C. was just magical to witness that history there. And so I say that fully supporting Donald Trump, but there are things when he mentions things like, getting involved with TikTok and to what extent, because it hasn't been laid out completely, but when he mentioned things like, oh, we'll take 50%, or I'm very skeptical of the government getting involved with any of these private organizations.
Well, and that's an important thing to look at, because over time, government has always gotten more involved than they should.
Yes.
Again, an important point that's in the book. But, let me give you an inauguration story, though.
Okay.
When I was 14 years old, I was at the Lyndon Johnson inauguration. I think it was 64, might have been 66. I lived in Washington, D.C. as a kid. And you can tell how old I am because that was a long time ago. But the story is, at the end of the parade route, we were standing there just where the parade leaves from the Capitol. And here come the governors of the various states. And there was the governor of Utah, Calvin Rampton, sitting in an open car with a convertible with his wife and his daughter sitting out there with him, too. And the story was, by the way, I did run out and shake his hand. He later is
wow.
the person that brought me into my law firm, to Jones Waldo, which I did work for. I now work for Curtin McConkie. But for 39 years at Jones Waldo, Calvin Rampton became my law partners. And I was 14 years old going out to shake his hand in a snowstorm. But the thing is as it went by and went down, then the discussion was around, there goes the governor of Utah with his two wives. But I think that, you look at the situation and we can relate it, I think, directly to what we deal with here in our own community. We're dealing with the issue at our university. In the middle of the wokeness, in the middle of the critical race theory era, I don't know what happened to critical race theory. I haven't even heard that term for quite a while. But in the woke theory period, the DEI period, those things are just hitting the junk pile faster than the junk pile itself can even accumulate. And so in having to, and I think we're figuring out what didn't work and what was wrong, what was unfair, and that's at all levels.
Right.
But the last in the state of Utah has undertaken that as well. They've done what they can to try in the last legislature to deal with those issues and for example, not having boys playing in girls' sports and all the things we've talked about and know about. But the last vestige and perhaps the most extreme swing at this thing was the removal of the name Dixie
at our local
from our university.
Yeah.
So that is, if you want to look at an insult to our community, something that really should never have happened, that was it.
Right.
So going forward, that's what needs to be addressed. And as I've looked into it, listened to people talk about it, and it to me, I think it's very important for us to look at this carefully and realize that the way we ultimately remove ourselves at the last vestige of this affront to our community, especially in this part of the state, is we need to rename the university, bring back Dixie State University.
Amen.
The Utah Tech term, it's like the symbol of an occupier.
Yes.
And I see those, and it's just the wrong symbol in the wrong time, and I think it's failing anyway. So I think that becomes important. If you think about the reasons that why it should go, for example, one is that the name is gone. For example, let's say you were to take Texas A&M. Now let's go to Texas A&M and tell them they got to take the term Texas out of Texas A&M. Would that sort of bother you if you were a Texan?
Right. Yeah. Good luck making that happen.
Yeah. But you recognize names like Hillsdale College. Now, you know where Hillsdale College is? Some people know where it is, but they know it's a great college. Or Elon University, another famous small school. Brown University. Those are names without geographic distinction, and yet we hear them and we know it means something pretty cool. And for marketers, and Marketing 101 is the difference between a distinctive trade term and a descriptive one. Distinctive ones have higher value in marketing. And so the term Dixie has its own place. And a lot of times we try to relate it to the South of the past. But remember, the whole wokeness thing is gone. This idea of coming to our town and the leaders of this university having come to our town or having gone out in the community with their survey and shown pictures of what it was like here 60 years ago, where there were racially improper and inappropriate things being done all over the country. but pick a picture of a parade in St. George 60 years ago in which things were inappropriate, and now say, and then infer and implicate that this community is racially prejudiced, and so that's why you should get rid of the name now. That's baloney.
Oh, it's despicable.
And so that has to be corrected. We can't just let this one go.
Right.
And I think that as we look at that, the real issue, it's the end of wokeness. It's time to return the name. And so I think that's something we need to look at and consider very strongly. Our legislators do, our leaders, and as a community, we have to demand that.
Absolutely. I mean, and just talk about the court of public opinion nationwide. DEI is dead. You look at corporations, they are throwing this out quicker than I ever thought that they would, actually. And not to say that, especially at our universities, they're doing some renaming and rebranding under the same umbrella. We know that they are doing that actually here at our own local woke university, because at their staff meeting just a few months ago, after legislation was passed at the state level to eliminate these DEI offices that are extremely discriminatory against students in an effort to remove this type of discrimination, leadership here was holding a staff meeting to talk about how they can skirt around this issue. How, maybe don't say diversity, equity, and inclusion in the same sentence, but maybe one sentence talk about diversity and then talk about inclusion separately and then talk, so all these ways that they can skirt around. So I'm not saying that people aren't still finding ways to go around this, but from a public opinion standpoint, people are tired of this garbage being shoved down their throats. And they know the term Dixie is not racist. They know boys don't belong competing in women's sports. And this is not a partisan issue. This is very much bipartisan. We just saw the legislation pass on the federal level to protect women's sports. There were Democrats that voted in favor of this. So I agree with you 100%. We need to get back to our roots. And this symbol of Utah Tech University is such a symbol of the deception that went into that name change and the woke ideology that went into that name change. So, amen. I hope that our legislators really hold this university accountable to make those necessary changes.
And of course, and the name has value. For example, if you're in Miami Valley of Ohio, that's a very famous place, actually. The Wright brothers, came out of that area and stuff. And you think, did you confuse that? Should they change their name because there's a Miami, Florida? Is the confusion of the name such that people can't figure that one out? Utah's Dixie is the same way. We have a rich history, rich heritage, and a lot of tradition. And you look back at the pioneer writings, and they talk about going down to Dixie. They don't say, I'm going to St. George or Washington or Southern Utah. I'm going to Dixie.
Right.
And it has a very, very powerful spot in the hearts of our history. And so you don't just wash it out because there was some inertia behind things as they began to flow, basically after the George Floyd incident. It was just free, open season on anything that seemed to oppose the progressive movement. And that's all gone now.
Right.
And it's important that we still have, I think, all the basic rules of fairness still apply, and all and thoughtfulness and caring and sharing and all the things that are part of the human dignity of taking care of people and making them feel accepted. That none of that goes out the window at all.
Right.
And if it does, most of us would be there quickly to correct it.
Right.
But to create these presumptions that anything you might say puts you in a special suspect category. I mean, that's sort of like, Nazi Germany in 1937.
Absolutely.
You got to be careful who you talk to, what you say. And it was interesting, I was talking to a person today who was just in a discussion saying, should I use the word Dixie anymore? She still was nervous about that. And, I saw the greatest hat. It was, it was a red hat. And on it said, "Make Dixie great again."
Oh, that's awesome.
And I think that's where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's so interesting how their solutions to these perceived fake problems are actually the ones causing racism. For instance, I sat down not too long ago with some of the nursing leadership at the university because I was getting reports from nursing students that they were being told to use pronouns in their emails, to not refer to mothers giving birth with she, her pronouns until they know how the mother identifies, and being made to feel like they are inherently racist. And so I sat down with the leadership, and, one of them flat out said, well, as white people, we can reach up and grab the fruit. And sometimes we have to stack some boxes so that people of color can reach up and grab the fruit too. And I looked at her and I said, that is the most racist thing I have ever heard in my entire life. And she says, well, I used to think just like you, my 20 years of nursing, I didn't think I was racist either. But, now I've realized my inherent bias. And I said, so are you telling me that those 20 years of nursing, you were treating your patients differently because of the color of their skin? And she says, well, no. I always treated everyone with respect and equally. And I said, so how does this newfound bias that you've discovered, how is that actually helping your patient care outcomes? And she just stared at me for I let it be awkwardly silent for a good couple minutes until she finally just said, well, I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm going to have to get back to you on that. And then it finally spurred into, realizing the underlying issue was this was being spurred by the DEI office at the university, making these professors fear for their tenureship if they don't comply with this ridiculousness of racism. So I loved that President Trump in his inauguration speech pointed out that we are going to be colorblind and a merit-based society, because that's what it should be about, is the merit, not the color of our skin, not our gender, not our sexual orientation, merit.
Well, and the law is very well established, and it came out of a period when I think there was a lot of inequity. And the laws, as they have evolved from the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, I mean, my generation did help a lot of things happen. And one is equal opportunity is quite well established. Now, that never assures an equal outcome.
Right.
But to go overboard on the equal opportunity to where there simply controls everything, that's where the sort of negative juxtaposition comes out, in, for example, in the example that you just gave. And we need to be careful of that because it just, you can't reach perfection in that area. But we can always try to be good to one another and make sure we have programs that really are fair.
Right.
But again, it's based on what people do. Everyone makes their own decision. And I think that that's part of the challenge that we see in this whole process. It'll be so interesting to see where it goes because we're charting a new course in the world today. And, you look at the things that are out there. I mean, I'm going for a cruise, next year in the Gulf of America. I think that's going to be kind of fun. And when I think of America, though, and the reason it's appropriate is because America is North and South America, and there's a Gulf in between.
Absolutely.
So we're not dissing Mexico.
Right.
We're just dealing with reality. And it's interesting to have someone come along and say, hey, rationally thinking, this is how we might look at it.
Right.
And so it is an interesting experience that we're approaching. But, getting back, I think, to kind of some of the issues that I see in the story that I wrote is that I feel like as we go forward as a country, we can't allow sort of the deceptions of government to always put us in a position where we lose our ability to affect outcomes. And that when I see all the great stuff happening right now, I feel very positive about it. But remember, we're very cyclical. Things can be great this term and very difficult next term. And you never know what's going to happen. And in a lot of ways, we're in the middle of our own, it's a really political suspense thriller.
Right.
We're all living the part.
Right. Well, I want to get your legal expertise a little bit on these pardons, both from Biden and Trump. So first, with Joe Biden, because this is what I don't understand, and you can help me here from your legal brain. How can you preemptively pardon someone such as Anthony Fauci back to 2014, the entire Biden family, the J6 committee, which if that doesn't look guilty, I don't know what makes them look guilty. I don't know what does if you have to pardon them from something. If everything they were doing was legal, why do they need to be pardoned? Like, how do you preemptively pardon something that hasn't even been charged?
I think these will there will be some sorts of legal resistance to this. It's hard to go after a president that's left office. He's just taken the ink on the desk with him.
Right.
But still, it's a bad precedent. It's a bad precedent. I hate to say it, but even for Trump to be out pardoning everybody. Ultimately, we're a nation, a rule of laws, and the problem is that the laws are unfairly applied in many cases, as we saw, I think, in the case of some of Trump's cases. But the problem is it makes it futile. It means that the king can ultimately, wave his wand,
right.
and some people that are part of the in crowd, they're okay, and everybody else, all the plebes out there, are just going to eat cake.
Right.
And that does bother me. But this is more of a tit-for-tat situation because of the contest between these two people. Again, similar to the book. And I think that's the challenge going into the future, that I think Congress needs to act to start looking at how the pardon issue is going to be dealt with in the future.
Right.
Trump should not have free rein to do it, nor should Biden have had free rein to do it, in my opinion.
And I can understand that. My take with the January 6th, so, I was in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, 2021. I was not scaling the walls of the Capitol.
I saw you in the videos. You were right in there.
My husband teases. He's like, it's a good thing I was there, because if I wasn't there, you would have been in the Capitol. But no, I would not have engaged in any violence or vandalism or anything like that. But the very sad thing about that whole experience is many were denied due process. Many who were locked up did not engage in violence or vandalism. Simply, they were let into the Capitol and, walked somewhere where they shouldn't have at that point in time.
Which I would have done if I had been there.
Right. Which,
it was a party.
Yeah.
But if you put it in the context, now that's what happened there. But you see, the real house of the people is not the Capitol building. The house of the people is Walmart. And what was happening at Walmart about that time? Well, they were getting burned down, and people were torching the place and ravaging the place, stealing everything they could in certain parts of the country.
Yep.
And what was Kamala Harris and that group doing? They were contributing money to bail those people out.
Yep.
And so you look at that situation, and then the president has the power of the pen to pardon the January 6 people, and it makes sense in that case.
Right.
From a fairness standpoint. But precedence-wise, it's tough. From a pure fairness standpoint, what else do you do? But we got to remember, that's where the real house of the people is. It's where the people are.
Right.
It's not in the halls of Congress. Let's say that they had taken the place over and thrown up an upside-down flag and taken control. Who cares?
Right.
Is that going to mean any power is shifting in the United States? None.
Yeah. Well, the fact that he had to pardon the January 6th committee tells us everything, that whole thing was just a setup. And I'll even use the word hoax. And I'm not saying that there weren't individuals there who did commit crimes. Yeah, there was a small percentage that did. But the entire thing of it being labeled an insurrection and worse than Pearl Harbor, in the words of Kamala Harris.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, give me a break.
It is total nonsense. And what's more is they know it.
Yes.
But that's what they try to describe it. They have to have things to go after. But it's human nature. We all do that to a certain degree. We defer to our own self-interests, and then we look to our government to try to embrace whichever interest that is. And that's why we have a constitution, and that's why we have a lot of laws that a lot of people don't like.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like us lawyers because we remind them of the laws. But we're charted in an interesting direction. It'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Where do you think we're going?
I think that President Trump needs to have some very good security and bodyguards for a long time. And same with the vice president. You see, this thing is set up. We have Trump setting the direction, and Trumpism is different than Republicans or Democrats. It is its own thing. And if it prevails, then we're looking at 12 years of this sort of impact and influence in our country. The appointment of all the Supreme Court justices that are left in the next 12 years will be made by a Republican president if this holds. And so look to J.D. Vance, because he is really when I say the beneficiary, he's also the greatest obligee. He's got things he's got to do and live up to.
Yeah.
So there's some interesting leadership issues, but that's where I think our country optimistically is going.
Right.
But they can stumble all over the place, and and basically, do a few things wrong, and things can change quickly. It'll be interesting to see how they handle the roundup of the illegal aliens, for example, and how far that goes.
Yeah.
And the optics of things make a big difference, and the fair treatment of people makes a big difference. And so it's something to watch closely.
I think it's good now, though, that, and there's still some brainwashed people out there who believe the mainstream media, but I think one silver lining that has come from these past 4 or 5 years since COVID is people in general no longer trust what CNN is putting out, or MSNBC, or even Fox to an extent as well. And that's a good thing, because so much of that is propaganda. And like you said, it's the perception of, say they do a great job with the deportation of violent criminals who are illegal immigrants. There's still going to be footage out there who is going to portray that, oh no, they're rounding up these innocent people and ripping away children from their mothers. We've seen them do fake stories like that before at the border under Trump. And so, but I'm grateful that a lot of people have woken up. Still, some haven't. I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of people have, and no longer trust those narratives.
Well, don't you think, as you look at what's happened, is that the voting public, the American public, is smarter than all this, because you look at those particular networks who seem to try to control things and different points of view. They could jump to 8 to 12 different points of view, and yet they whittled it down to 2, with one being much greater than the other. And I think they're seeing through all of this, even though the media is so massive and there's so many different options. And that's how the decision was made. I mean, that those millions of people who voted for Trump, I suspect a lot of them don't really like him.
Yeah.
But they see what he stands for and where it might go. And they viewed the opposition and all these things that we're talking about, they filtered through. And so what that means is free speech is still working.
Right.
The free press, that includes the media, is still working. And the people have a lot more power now than they did a few months ago.
Right.
Or, than they did in pre-November.
Yeah.
So hopefully that holds.
And that's where I give so much credit to Elon with why I say saving free speech with taking over Twitter, because, now we have Zuckerberg freely admitting that at the bidding of the Biden administration, he was censoring free speech.
Oh, yeah.
My page got shut down. I was completely shadow banned. Things that I was saying all along with COVID that was completely truthful in regards to natural immunity, the vaccine, masks, I would get notifications all the time. Oh, misinformation, false information. And now it's, oh yeah, no, that was all under the Biden administration. Why was my free speech being suspended at the call of my government through an organization like Facebook? Where's the accountability?
Well, and where we are, like a university should be a free speech zone.
Yes.
Not a place to coddle people, a place for them to grow in the conflict of ideas. And so it is out in the world. They don't launch students into, so that's the case. But another thing is to watch how much things are changing, not just in the U.S., but across the world. I think we'll see that with this election, that the trend to go to more freedom of thought and expression, and I think also the concomitant responsibility of citizenry. I think that's going to pick up. We already see it in different places around the world, but come this election, we're going to be next year, we're going to see some other governments changing their approach to how things are done and with the rights that people have. And even among some of our friendly countries, we're going to see some different points of view that are going to be expressed that may change how governments rule and are run, even across Europe and maybe some other places too.
Which I love that. I love that we are setting that example for the world. So we are down to just 30 seconds. I want to make sure, Tim, how does everyone find your book and support you?
Blue, Red, and Dead, and they can go on. They can. It's on all the sites. It's on Amazon. It's Barnes and Noble and on Ingram Sparks, and just go on and order it. If you like it, be sure and write a comment if you
leave
can.
a review.
And the audio book comes out in about a week, about 2 weeks actually.
Okay, thanks so much, Tim Anderson. Thanks for tuning in, guys. See you next week.
Thanks for being a part of the Michelle Tanner Podcast. Please like, follow, subscribe, and share. And always remember to keep exposing truth.
But I won't back down. No, I won't back down.
This has been a production from a podcast studio.